Thank you.
Hi, good evening, ladies and gents. Today's licensing meeting on the 5th of November 2020. Do we have any apologies, first of all?
I've not received any.
I'll take that as a no. Is there any late items to be introduced by the chair? None by me. Any declarations of interest? No, that's a no. Minutes held of the last meeting on the 6th of August 2020.
Move as printed, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Smell.
Yeah, I'll second that. Sure.
Thank you, John. First item on the right. Before we go any further, can I just make a quick comment? After last meeting, I had a conversation with Alex. So there was a lot of interference with people keeping some noise in the background regarding their mics and stuff. So please, if you could all use the bar chart on the left-hand side, and somebody wants to speak, and I'll try and get that on there as soon as possible. And when you have finished speaking, if you could please switch your mics off. Right, next item is approval of testing. Sorry, that's the last one. I think it's over to you now, isn't it, Mike?
It is, yes, Chair. Boatman licensing.
Boatman license, yes. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Yeah, this report provides an outline of, and forgive me, Section 94 of the Public Health Acts Amendment Act 1907. That's the last time I'll say it. I'll just refer to it as the Act, sort of for the rest of it. So it provides an outline of the Act that relates to the licensing of pleasure boats and vessels and the individuals that operate them. And the steps required to adopt such legislation. So this report follows on from a proposal that members may be aware of to operate pleasure boat trips along a stretch of the River Derwent at some point in the future. The legislation provisions give local authorities the power to grant licences for pleasure boats and pleasure vessels to be let for hire or to be used for carrying passengers for hire, and also to grant licences to persons in charge of navigating such vessels. And we can also attach terms and conditions as we see fit. The local authority may charge for each type of licence a fee that's deemed to be appropriate by them, and as with other licensing regimes, fees must be reasonable and based on cost recovery for administering the licenses. You know, the process is not dissimilar to other licence, permit and registration processes that are already in place and that are administered by the licensing team. The adoption of the legislation would allow the council to take ownership of the licensing of vehicles, vessels and individuals in charge of them in the interests of public safety. The administration of the regime would be incorporated into the business of the existing licensing team, thereby ensuring that such activities are carried out in a safe and controlled framework. So Licensing Committee are asked to support and refer the request to full council for the required legislation to be incorporated into the Constitution. Council would then be asked to defer the decision making and fee setting processes back to Licensing Committee and the relevant officers for administration and compliance. So the recommendation, Chair, is that committee note the content of the report and approve referral to full council for adoption of the Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Sorry, before I go any further, just to answer Lucy Keeler's question. Yes, Lucy, my apologies. It should be 17th September and not August. My mistake. Right, do we have any questions for Mike Kay?
That sounds good to me, that silence. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, no problem. So, item 6. Is that over to Angela?
That is, Chair. Thank you.
Sorry, before you move on, Chair. Sorry, do you just want to get the confirmation of the recommendation for that previous report?
Yeah. Can we have the confirmation? Are everybody happy with that?
Yep. Okay.
Yes, Chair.
Yeah.
Very
Thank you.
happy.
Yeah. Yes, I'm happy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. Over to you, Angela.
Thank you. The next item is an update for you. Last time we met, I gave you the briefest update on or introduction to the statutory taxi and private hire vehicle standards, which had been released by the Department of Transport. Since the last meeting when I introduced it to you, I mean, it was hot off the press then, so nobody had really had time to delve into any of the detail of it. But I have had chance to have a look at it in some more detail. And what I can say that in looking at it, it's clear that as a council, we are already doing a great deal in meeting the expectations of the document. But as with most things, there's always room for consideration and re-evaluation to look at whether we do more, whether we do the same, or whether we do less. What I'm proposing now is to give you an overview of each area and try and include where we are already doing something, and then finish with the main ongoing project that is intended to pull it all together. I've provided you with a document to follow for the purposes of the briefing, and it's something I'll use as like a template to refer to in future meetings as we move forward. So here we go. Sections 1 and 2 are really self-explanatory. In the main, it's a set of expectations that's been collated with the help of many people and has come about from some unfortunate happenings in other areas centred around child sexual exploitation. It's obviously essential that this is not allowed to happen again. And whilst those examples focus around the protection of children and young persons, we must also bear in mind that vulnerabilities can have many faces, and we need to think wider to the people with non-visible and visible disabilities, those that may have been out in the city intoxicated, whether by drugs or alcohol, the elderly or people with learning disabilities. All of these people are vulnerable at some stage. So what we need to do is ensure that our practices, processes and decisions are as open and fair as possible and able to underpin our commitment to public safety. So basically those first two sections are the introductory element. So from section 3 we now get into some of the detail, and this deals with the administration of licensing and focusing mainly around the creation of an all-encompassing policy. Here at Derby we've got many good policies and practices in place which, whilst are sound, do need reviewing, and they do need to pulling together in one place so that anybody can find anything in that one little document, whether it is a paper one, obviously available online, etc. My proposal is therefore that a new dynamic policy is created for Derby, which includes all that necessary information, and that's not just for customers but for councillors, for everybody, so it is a basic brief for a go-to document. It will obviously need further communication with people, including some internal consultation, and once that has been pulled together, we've got it's going to take more officers and departments pulling together, and then obviously we would be requesting this committee to release the document for external input and communication. I'm hoping that a basic framework draft should be available in the new year, and like with all other licensing policies, it'll be a fluid document so it can be changed at any time. Usually I would be hoping to set a timeline of about 5 years, but as I say, it would be a fluid document, so it could be amended at any time. Now if we move on to section 4, this section is around the gathering and sharing of information. The first area we talk about is the DBS, and again we are ahead of the game here. The requirement for an enhanced DBS is a mandatory prerequisite for all new applicants. Driver's conditions state that the driver must sign up and maintain subscription to the DBS online service. This is checked on a regular basis by the licensing team, and any drivers who have not maintained their subscription are contacted, because obviously if they continue to refuse to maintain their subscription, they will be in breach of one of the driver conditions. Obviously, the DBS cannot provide information relating to overseas convictions, and so we do ask for a certificate of good character where residency is involved. The immigration unit also has input around residency matters, so we have their support as well. We have a good working relationship with the police and carry out joint operations on a regular basis, dependent upon resources, of course. We also rely on our police colleagues to advise us of any areas of concerns. So if anybody comes across their radar who may be a taxi driver, proprietor, owner, operator, then they will share that information with us. We have regular meetings with our safeguarding units and other licensing authorities around us, well, not just around us, but across the country, to share and receive information which might be of interest. This may include, as we move forward, creating or updating any information sharing protocols we have. Drivers and operators are also a good source of information, and we receive that through our dedicated taxi licensing email or by telephone, or sometimes just by word of mouth. A clear process for submitting complaints will be included in the new style policy, as well as exploring the use of an online form. The next area deals with decision making at all levels, and as we know, taxi licensing is a non-executive function, and so the decision making element can be delegated to a committee, subcommittee or officer, where each application must be considered on its own merits. The standards are suggesting minimum training for members, and it's not just limiting it to licensing procedures. The training should include the rules of natural justice, understanding of child sexual exploitation, disability inequality, the making of difficult and potentially controversial decisions, and one of the more important ones, the appearance of bias. And I must say that this is why attending training sessions is an extremely important part of the role. A review into current delegations may also be included as part of the overall review of practices, just to ensure that there is a clear separation between the responsibilities of the decision makers and the enforcers. Again, that is something that is quite clear in the standards should be in place. Now we move into the specific areas of taxi licensing, and Section 6 deals with driver licensing. I'm pleased to say that we carry out numerous checks and balances in line with the requirements, which include safeguarding training, and that in itself incorporates CSE, county lines training, vulnerabilities in general. We don't currently carry out language proficiency tests, but it will be a consideration and something that's looked at in a review of the application process in the future. Section 7 deals with our vehicle licensing process, and our processes are robust, but the standards document does give some further elements for consideration, such as whether annual basic DBS checks should be initiated for the owners or proprietors of the vehicles. Now, I know most owners or proprietors have their own vehicles, but this could affect those who lease their vehicles and have or load out accident management. So they don't own their own vehicles, and so there could be some crossover there. The standards also suggest the use of CCTV. This is a very complicated area and quite a grey area at the moment, because there are arguments for and against. We have issues around data controllers, basically who would be responsible for the information, the playback, recording, etc., and whether those recordings should include visual and audio. Excuse me. The whole subject will need to be investigated further and would obviously form part of probably a separate consultation. Next, we move on to private hire operators and whether they should undergo an annual basic DBS check. If the operator is a company, then it's suggested that the directors of that company undergo a test. And the operator, it also mentions about the operator vetting their dispatchers and putting them through a basic DBS, because while the private hire operator doesn't have direct contact with passengers, they still have responsibility over passenger safety. The dispatcher does, however, have more contact with the passenger in allocating the car and the driver, obviously with the exception of online operators such as Uber, and there are others. And obviously those dispatchers are handling personal information, such as when people are away on holiday, etc. So the standards recommend that operators do put their call and dispatch staff through a basic DBS. We are nearly there. The standards also make reference to record keeping, and our current conditions do set out the information that we already require operators to collect and retain. We also work and support with our school contracts team, particularly as their work does involve young and vulnerable persons. As well as that team, other internal partners will obviously be engaged to help build the elements of the new policy. And finally, we look at how enforcement sits in the regime. There is also always contention in this area with the current ability of vehicles to be licensed as a hackney in one area but contracted into another as a private hire. This obviously has safety concerns both in relation to vulnerabilities and vehicle condition. In the absence of any legislation, one way of being able to manage some of those concerns is by way of a cross-border enforcement policy, which would allow officers in one area to check driver vehicles from another. It's intended to investigate this as part of our general review and will be floated at the next meeting of the Derby and Derbyshire Group in the new year. Our expectations around drivers' vehicles and operators are clearly laid out in our conditions. The conditions are given to the drivers and also available on the website, and that information also includes sanctions for non-compliance and the use of our penalty point system. Each set of conditions are due to be reviewed as part of this overall creation. It's also proposed that our existing convictions policy and point system be reviewed at this time, and that would enable a clearer framework for consideration of new applications as well as tackling existing driver behaviour. So in general, as you can tell from that overview, there's a great deal to do, but there's a lot that we already do. The first major part will be to review existing practices and ensure that they're strong, fair and accessible, and then build a strong policy to capture them. This will mean looking at our existing conditions and perhaps building in additional measures. But obviously we're ensuring that the public is kept safe, as that is at the forefront of all our licensing areas. Chair, thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Angela. First of all, I'm pleased on the report that we are working and going in the right direction, because I do get asked quite a few questions in full council, my council, so I'm pleased to know that we're working in the right direction, and a lot of the policies that we are adhering to are dealing with are already put in place, so I thank you for that. Councillor Khan, you want to ask a question, sir?
Yeah, I've got two questions.
Yeah, off you go.
One question is, that drivers from out the city that driving in our city, how will you enforce that? I can't see that on here. And how will you enforce that? And the language one you've just raised, and it did come on previously, that was a language test that used to happen. Will there be new drivers, existing drivers, or how are you gonna implement that? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor. In relation to the first part, the cross-border vehicles that are coming into our areas, these standards, because they're a statutory standard, but they aren't law, so it doesn't actually give us the ability to bar vehicles from the city completely. But what we can do by way of an enforcement protocol is for our enforcement officers to be able to check those vehicles that come in and the drivers to make sure that they're licensed properly and that the vehicles are in a reasonable condition. Because these standards are going out nationally, or expected to be used nationally, or expected to be adopted nationally, then we should see more standard conditions coming along in the near future. A lot of councils are looking at these standards and either lifting theirs or re-evaluating, as we are doing. In relation to the language test, I haven't actually carried any research out at this point into what a language test would consist of. But there are companies out there that do actually provide tests for drivers, specifically for drivers. So that would probably be my first attempt at finding out what we could use and how we could use. Initially, I would obviously say that, or I would suggest or propose that new drivers be implemented. You know, it's used as part of the new driver application, shall we say, as it comes on board. But there's no reason why this cannot be spread out to other drivers, because again, public safety, we must ensure that the driver can understand the customer and the customer can understand the driver, especially with the vulnerable people. There has to be that two-way connection. Does that help, Councillor?
No, can I, you know, okay, the existing drivers, how will you work on the list existing drivers that already got a license? And I recall previously we discussed about this test thing and these companies having these tests. The level was set at that high. The existing drivers will find it impossible to pass that language test also.
Yeah, and that's something I would expect to be able to come to a reasonable agreement with through consultation, and then obviously proposals to yourselves as the licensing committee. So it's basically seeing what's out there and seeing what we may be able to use all or part of.
So it will come back to the word reasonable. You have just raised reasonable. The reasonable word will, so that consultation will come to us, and then we'll decide what reasonable is.
Yes, Councillor, the proposal will need to be approved by the licensing committee.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Answer. Just a quick question, Councillor Sanders asked, how many drivers have attended a safeguarding training? Do we have any figures on us, or can you get them sent over by email?
I can get them sent over, but I am sure that all of the drivers or our existing drivers have now been through a safeguarding training. So the only safeguarding we're holding now are for those new drivers that are coming on board.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Sanders. Any more questions from anybody?
Chair, just I'd like to say, obviously reading through the government document, it's obviously been a very thorough job that the civil servants have done, and I think that forms a really good foundation for all licensing authorities to review their policies.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that is the plan, yes.
Okay, any more questions? No more questions on that. If I'm right, then I think that concludes tonight's meeting.
Chair, do we want
Yes.
to just then vote to that we
Yes.
are going to send it to full council?
Yes, can we, are we all in agreement with that to send it to full council, councillors?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all good.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm in agreement.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you very much, everybody. If there's no more questions from anybody, that then concludes tonight's meeting.
Thank you.